So this is Anushka Shankar, and she is our talk on seeing science in everyday life, lessons from hummingbirds. So Anushka is a National Geographic explorer and young leader, also a Lewis and Clark Field Scholar, and is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell. She studies how hummingbirds manage to exist in different environments. And by studying all of that, it made her start to think what were lessons that she could learn herself about collecting information on her own life. So today, I know I'm looking forward to hearing her share some of her lessons that she has learned about herself while studying animals and how to collect data on things that are right around you and relate them to the world. So without further ado, I'm going to bring you on in. Welcome. And I'm just going to unmute you as well. Oh, you might have to unmute yourself. Perfect. So welcome. We're so thrilled to have you with us here today.
Hi, Lizzie. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be alongside all of these amazing women.
Yes, we had a fantastic start to the morning and yesterday as well. And we're excited to hear from you as well. So without further ado, you can take it away.
Thank you. Before I start sharing some slides and pictures, I just want to say that I've been doing and studying basically science for the past 15 years. And even before that, when I was in school, I would raise caterpillars and watch them become butterflies. So recently, I started reading a lot of extremely realistic apocalyptic fiction. And I started getting really affected by some very stark future projections of ways in which we could be destroying our world. And it really affected me because I've been seeing data on climate change and I've been studying threatened and endangered animals for a long time, whose habitat is getting lost and who are getting poached to extinction. So I was getting in this really dark and introspective space. And even if you don't think that humans are the main cause of climate change, I think there's no denying that we are causing species extinctions on this just absolutely mind-blowing scale, as if we own the earth and it's made for us. So I've come to think a lot about what am I doing with my science and wondering how I, in my little ways, can do some good. And I think my role is to remind us and remind myself of all the wonder that there is in this world and who we share this world with, and realize how much we can learn even just for ourselves, for our selfish needs, by paying attention to the natural world and doing what we can to better the earth and the animals that live on the earth. So I'll share with you some of what I've learned by studying hummingbirds, and maybe you can take some ideas away for how you can pay more attention to the natural world. Okay, let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. I think you can. Okay. Like Lizzie said, I'll be talking about science and the everyday lessons that you can get from life. And I'll start with reminding you that we share this earth with giraffes, who have the same number of neck vertebrae as we do, amazingly, with blue whales that are the largest mammals. They're very closely related to us compared to like birds and lizards and other animals, ostriches, ants, insects, and it's just periodically astounds me that all of these animals live on this earth. I've had the pleasure of studying king cobras, which exist in very fragmented landscapes nowadays in places like India. And while I was studying those king cobras, I ended up taking a lot of photos of insects and butterflies and bugs and spiders and snakes and other plants and all kinds of things. So it really this was one of my first experiences studying wildlife biology, and I really got to see how snakes like this have such a cultural significance in India, but they also have to live in such fragmented human-dominated landscapes. And they're obviously feared, understandably, for being as venomous as they are. I also studied this giant bird, the Malabar pied hornbill in southwestern India. And this bird also is starting to live in very, very fragmented human landscapes. They have to nest in giant tree cavities where the female seals herself in and takes care of her babies for 3 months while the male feeds her. And the trees that they can nest in are getting cut down to make way for roads and for human buildings. And so there's less and less area in which they can live. I also spent a lot of time studying hummingbirds, and I spent about a year in Ecuador in the cloud forests and in the high elevation Andes, studying how hummingbirds use their environment and what they spend their energy on. So these are two hummingbirds at feeders. They're just incredibly fast flyers. They're really, really tiny. So the smallest hummingbird weighs the same as this 10 paisa coin from India, or the same as a US dime. And this is a bee hummingbird that you can only find in Cuba. They use up energy so fast that if you had their metabolic rate or their rate of energy expenditure, you'd need to eat 300 hamburgers a day to survive. They're using up just incredible amounts of energy because of their size. They lose heat very quickly, and they have to make heat to replace that heat. So they're also flying, which is very, very energetically expensive. And yet somehow they've managed to colonize habitats all across North and South America. They live in the rainforest, in the cloud forest, in the deserts in Arizona, in the high elevation mountains, all across parts of Canada, the US, and South America, and Central America. And somehow they've managed to diversify into over 330 different types of species of hummingbirds. Let me just get my pointer so I can, so there's this crimson topaz, which is super colorful. There's one of my favorites, the booted rackettail with its tiny white boots on its feet. The smallest, which I already showed you, the bee hummingbird. This giant hummingbird, which weighs about 10 times the size of the bee hummingbird. And the sword-billed hummingbird, which has a beak that's longer than the rest of its body, unlike any other bird. So somehow and it also carries its beak around with its head pointed upwards so it doesn't fall to the ground. It's just incredible, the diversity of hummingbirds that exist. So I was really curious, what are hummingbirds spending their time on? How do they use their day and manage to exist in these extreme environments and still diversify to so many different species? And this is where my data collection came in. I was collecting data for my PhD, but I also started wondering questions like introspectively, do I know enough to be doing what I'm doing now? Do I work hard enough? Do I work too much? What really makes me happy? And so while I started studying these hummingbirds, I was starting to think about these questions for myself. What am I doing with my time? So I started using an app to track how I spent my time. And recently I've started using a different app. So I've just tried out a bunch of different things to see what works for me. Another way is to use Fitbit to see how much I'm exercising, how many steps I'm getting in, what I'm spending energy on. And some of my lessons that I learned were that this is from tracking my time for about 880 days, which is about 2.5 years. I learned that I was spending a lot of time on administrative tasks and not as much time on the core research that I wanted to be spending time on. So I started shifting how I use my time and spending less and less time on administration and more time on my research tasks. And so by tracking all my time, I realized that I was spending about 5% of my day on exercise, which is about an hour a day. And I spent about a solid 33% of my 24 hours on sleep, which is about 8 hours a day, which is good and healthy. And I wanted to know what hummingbirds spend their energy and time on. So we can't track them with Fitbits like we could humans. There aren't accelerometers or Fitbits small enough to put on hummingbirds. So we have to find other ways. So I went and studied them in the field, and I measured how much energy they were spending on different activities, and I estimated the time they were spending on different activities. And I basically found that they're really, really flexible in how they use their time. Based on how the food is distributed in their habitat, they can spend a really long time, really big part of the day, up to 30 hours a day, flying and searching for food and feeding, and the rest of the time sitting. Or they can, if the resources or food is really abundant and it's very clustered, they can spend just 3 hours a day or 25% of their day on daytime activity. So they're really flexible in how they use their energy. And that taught me a lot for what I could do in my own life and how flexible or rigid I should be with how I use my time. This is obviously a very personal thing. You have to find what works for you. So then I went to live in Alaska, where in Fairbanks, where there's a lot of snow and the days are very dramatic through the year. So in the winter, there's only 4 hours of sunlight. And in the summer, there's only 4 hours of dark and 20 hours of sunlight. So a lot of people, and disproportionately women, get really depressed in the winters in Alaska because of the short daylight. And I was wondering, I'm from a tropical place and I'm going to this extremely, stark place in terms of its day lengths, and how is my mood going to be? So I've been tracking my mood for a really long time, since before I went to Alaska. And this was a nice this is for about 1,000 days, which is a little over 3 years. And I was wondering how this kind of darkness would affect my mood. And so this is the kind of data I collected. This orange color means that it's like I was feeling radically good that day. This is about twice a day I'd enter what my mood was and what I thought it would be affected by. What I realized that I'm on average a pretty happy person. Most of my days are pretty happy. There are some bad ones. And so I started to figure out what makes me happy. What are those good days correlated with, or what makes me enjoy my time? And I realized that I really like Fridays and Sundays. I don't like the beginning of the week as much. But really what I really get joy from is dancing and reading books and talking to people about science, because it just brings so much of joy. And the other thing is spending time outside. And I think work is one of the main things that can, if it's going well, it can give me a lot of satisfaction. And I think making a difference and making an impact can give me a lot of satisfaction. So I'll bring you back with that. These are some of the lessons that I've learned from watching animals and from immersing myself, and maybe the lessons that we can learn by watching the world around us. So I'd like to remind you that we share this planet with all of these animals. So what can you do? On this daily level, maybe you can collect data on yourself, but maybe try to go out and take a walk for at least 1 or 2 hours a week, with about 15 to 20 minutes every day or every few days. If some local people are up for elections, think about their environmental policies and try to prioritize that in who you select or vote for in your local governments. Try to minimize waste. Really, before you buy new things, consider whether you truly need them. Contribute maybe to citizen science projects. So on your walks outside, you can see what animals there are and record them for citizen science. And identify living things on your walk. So there's a lot of apps that you can now use to identify the plants and the insects and the bugs and everything that you see outside. You can contribute to rainforest protection. So I know Callie is giving a talk during this conference, this festival, and Callie brought us, and she heads the Reserva Youth Land Trust, or she contributes to it, and the youth lead this land trust to protect rainforest in Ecuador. You can contribute to citizen science projects by collecting data. Like there's different ones. One for birds, which is called eBird. There's others, like you can go, if just from the comfort of your own house, you can count penguins or watch out for pollinators, or contribute to all kinds of other citizen science projects on Zooniverse. You can trace bird beaks for scientists who are interested in understanding the shapes of bird beaks on Mark My Bird. And iNaturalist in general, you can contribute to a lot of, you can contribute photos, and you can take records of any wildlife that you see outside. And there's a whole compilation on National Geographic's website of citizen science projects that you can contribute to. And I would love your questions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic and inspiring to think about how we can look at our own lives based on hummingbirds and other animals as well. So the first question for you that is coming from our live stream is, what is your favorite type of hummingbird?
I definitely like the booted racket tail quite a bit, because it has that long tail with the two forks. And I once saw a mating display of a male showing off to a female in the forest, and I think that really stuck with me. They're just extremely adorable.
Amazing. We also have another question that is asking about your social media again. So I'm going to see if I can maybe also add that to if I can put up a banner with it. But while we're doing that, I'll throw another question at you. Curious about how in your chart you showed when you started to look at your energy and the hummingbird's energy, and you also you changed what your energy is on, right? So you had so much of that in the admin section and just a little bit of the research, and then it almost flipped completely where so much less of it was admin and so much more was research. So you talked about being flexible and adaptable, but how did you make that shift from having so much admin work to it being so much more research based?
That's a great question. It's not, well, I think it's just a question of when you do things and how you view your time. So if the problem was that when I'm doing my research, it's like for myself, whereas some of the administrative stuff is like feedback to other people and what I owe other people. And it's much easier for me personally to do stuff for other people than to do things for myself. So I started thinking about the research time as inviolable time that I couldn't spend on doing other things, and consolidating the admin time to certain days of the week, because it just spread out everywhere. I wasn't restricting it. I wasn't trying to be more deliberate about when I spent the admin time. And the other thing that I did was I joined this co-working website where I could work with other people and be accountable to them. We'd say state our goals in the beginning, go on a muted video call very often, and just do our own work, and then at the end say whether we'd achieved our goals. And so I got this element of like accountability to another person, even if I didn't know them. But that made me start focusing more on my research. So there's a lot of these like co-working sessions that really make me prioritize my own work and the research, and that's one of the ways.
Amazing. You showed us a couple of different apps that you have tracked your mood or your time. Are there any of those that you recommend most, that you loved the best? Or is it kind of individualized?
I'll put them here in the chat if you can share them. There's Save My Time to track your time, like up to every 15 minutes. You can change how often you enter it, but we unlock our phones a lot. So every time you unlock your phone, it'll ask you. It's an only Android app. And then there's Get Harvest, which I think companies use to track time for working hours, which is what I've shifted to doing now. I don't really want to track my time on my personal time anymore. I've already understood that to some extent. So I just want to track my work hours and see what I do during the working day. And that can be useful for that.
Amazing. And then are there any other species that you have considered observing and tracking to compare to the hummingbird about their energy output, or just are curious about in general?
Oh my God, I have so many ideas. I plan to go to India in a few years, and I would love to be able to study sunbirds. So they're very similar to hummingbirds. They also drink nectar like hummingbirds do, but they're completely unrelated in terms of evolutionary origin. So they do a similar thing. It's like a convergence on the same thing from two different evolutionary paths. And so I'd be really curious to see how they spend their time and their energy. Yeah.
Amazing. Another question is kind of a technical one, perhaps, is how did you actually manage to track and observe the fast flying birds? Hummingbirds fly so fast. So how is that? They can't wear these trackers that we can wear. So how is that actually possible to test?
I did skip over that a little bit. We use a few different methods. One of them is called a respirometry. So you can measure the breath of a bird and see how much oxygen and carbon dioxide it has in it. And then you can see carbon dioxide is a good proxy for energy expenditure, because all of our body processes that take energy kind of end in carbon dioxide. So while a hummingbird is hovering and it's coming to a feeder and it's sticking its bill in, we can pull the air from the flower, from a fake flower, and collect a hummingbird's breath and measure the carbon dioxide in it. So while it's hovering, we can measure how much energy it takes to hover, or we can put it in a box overnight, catch it in the evening, put it in a box, pull the air from the box and push new air in, and measure the change in carbon dioxide from the in and the out, and measure how much carbon dioxide the hummingbird is producing. So we can measure nighttime energy expenditure that way, and then let the bird go in the morning. So that's one of the main ways.
Not what I would have thought. So wonderful. The other question I have for you is, it is so clear that you are very curious. You have mentioned a bunch of times, I wonder, I was thinking, I was questioning. How do you decide which of those wonderings and questions to actually act on? Or have you been able to get to all of them?
Of course not. No, I think there's way more that I can ever do. I think one of the ways is to, I think science is moving towards being more collaborative and open. I think involving more people, mentoring students who can then go off and study a branch of those questions. That's one of the ways. But to decide, I don't know, it's hard. I think at every stage I've had to kind of question it and see which option to take and where to spend my energy and my time. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many questions out there, so I'm sure it's hard to get to all of them. If you had some advice for people who wanted to get into the field, either with birds or just into conservation, and really take the message that you started with about who are we on this planet and on this earth, and how can we help to conserve it and protect it, what would be something that you would recommend? I know you went through a whole bunch of citizen science and different things that we can be wonderful consumers, but if you had to pick kind of one or two of those to really stand out as your top choices, is it even possible to pick one or two of them? What would you recommend?
I think this is really hard because as a scientist, I attend conferences and I fly and I use up so much carbon. I think it's really hard to give people a solution that is acceptable to them. So I think presenting these options, you have to choose. Like I think consumerism is one of the biggest things that we can do on a personal level. Take bags with you to the store. Like there are small things like that which can help. Like if you buy a mesh plastic thing, try to rip it up. So I don't know which is best. Use the laundry less because each load of laundry produces a ton of microplastics. It's hard to know because we have to do what works for us. But I think all of these are things you should consider in your everyday.
Awesome. So kind of take a look at your own self and be introspective and say, what is it that I can do the most with, and what impact can I have the most impact?
Yeah, I think just pausing, I think, is one of the biggest things you can do, and considering the impact of what you're doing on every scale, maybe.
Absolutely. And then one final question for you. What inspired you to go on this path?
I think it was a series of events. Like I don't think I always knew that I was going to be a scientist. I didn't always know that I could be a biologist or a wildlife biologist. So it was people at every stage showing me what was possible and opening things up for me. I think that it was always a curiosity for animals and behavior, that eventually brought me here, I think.
Amazing. Well, Anusha, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you and learning so much. And I'm definitely going to think about tracking my own where my time is spent. I'm sure a lot of it is on admin as well. So I'm going to try and figure out how to make that shift as well. Thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much for hosting me. This was so much fun.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.